You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 151 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. For this episode, we are back to Joe and Charlie talking about the AA Big Book and their series, The Big Book Comes Alive. And for this one, they'll be focusing on steps 8 and 9. For anyone who is new to the podcast, Joe and Charlie were AA speakers, and the series, The Big Book Comes Alive, goes over the beginning of the Alcoholics Anonymous book and talking about how to work the 12 steps. On episode 143, which covered steps 6 and 7, I go into a breakdown of all of the previous Joe and Charlie episodes. I'm not going to do that here on this episode, but if you want to get a breakdown of where all of those episodes are, please check out episode 143. So in this episode, they will be covering steps 8 and 9 from the Big Book, and still in chapter 6, into action. And since this is covering steps 8 and 9, I wanted to pick out a reading more focused on step 8. We've had a couple of episodes talking about step 9 and 9th step amends, but step 8 kind of gets left out of the mix. Looking to Voices of Recovery, I found a few readings on step 8 and ultimately chose August 24th, which is on page 237. The opening quote: "This process of becoming willing to make amends involves a deeper surrender to our higher power's will than we have ever known before." And that comes from Sex Addicts Anonymous, page 48. Working steps 4 through 7 clarifies our responsibilities to those we have harmed. Nobody really talks about step 8. Usually we run right into step 9. However, my sponsor of 12 years died recently, and this step brings back a flood of memories. I had just finished my rather long 5th step and had done subsequent 6th and 7th steps. When I asked her how to do step 8, she said go back over my 4th step and make 3 lists. On the first list were the amends I thought I could do, one of which was repaying my mother $5,000 that I owed. The second list included the amends I wasn't sure I could do. Those included an employee I had fired. That one was tougher. The final list was the no way list. Here was my gentle, soft-spoken sponsor acknowledging that we all have our stubborn sides too. One of my amends was to do affirmations toward myself. I thought that was the most ridiculous amend to do. That went in the no way list because of my utter rejection of myself. Step 8 asked me to become willing. As the years go by, I become more willing to make amends to all those on my list, including myself. The meditation: willingness is the key to recovery. Help me become willing to make amends to those I have harmed. A couple of the other readings that I was looking at was keying on this willingness aspect. And I love the way this was divided into 3 lists. My sponsor had me do the same thing with mine. Ones that I felt that I could do, ones that I wasn't sure that I could do, and ones that I was not willing to do. In Joe and Charlie's talk here, they kind of do the same breakdown of how to make out different lists. So I thought this reading was really fitting for this episode. Once again, a busy start to the year. I'm working a lot with the Bay Area Retreat Committee, getting plans up and running for that. And we do have our links open for registration for that. And I'll be talking about that after the Joe and Charlie recording, as well as a listener email and a music suggestion. But now, without further ado, here is Joe and Charlie from The Big Book Comes Alive talking about steps 8 and 9. I hope you enjoy it.
Now, we got rid of resentments. That was replaced with love, patience, tolerance, compassion, and goodwill. We got rid of fear. That was filled with faith and courage. We looked at the people we've harmed, but we really haven't done anything about the removal yet of the guilt and the remorse associated with those people we've harmed. And if I want to be a complete human being again and want God to direct my entire thinking, then I've got to clean out this storeroom back here in the back of my head that's filled with guilt and remorse. And it's long been known how you do that. The world is known forever that you get rid of guilt and remorse by making restitution for those things you've done in the past that ended up hurting others. Now, the original alcoholics in our fellowship did not like the word restitution, and Bill didn't like it either. So he decided to change that from restitution to making amends, which is the same thing, it's just a little easier and softer. I don't know of anybody in AA that really likes to make restitution or to make amends. Nobody wants to have to go out and apologize to people for what we've done in the past. Nobody wants to take from today's money and livelihood to pay back for things we've stolen in the past. The only question is, can we afford not to? Can we afford not to? You know, I've yet to see anybody enter AA and read the steps off the wall and say, man, that steps 8 and 9 look like lots of fun. I can hardly wait until I get there. You know, nobody wants to do this. But the question is, can we afford not to do it? Way back in the forward to the second edition, we were talking about the history and talked about when Bill called on Bob. It sounded like Dr. Bob got sober immediately and never had another drink. But that really isn't true. Dr. Bob had one more drunk left in him. Not too long after Bill called on him, Dr. Bob found it necessary, he thought, to go to the medical convention over here in New Jersey. And his wife Ann begged Bill not to let him go. Said, Bill, if he goes over there, he'll get drunk. He does it every year. Bill said, let him go. Said he's going to have to learn to live in society where there's always going to be plenty of alcohol. If he gets drunk, we'll do something about it when he gets back. Sure enough, Dr. Bob went to the convention, got drunk, came back to Akron drunk, showed up at his nurse's home. And she called Ann and she said, come and get him. He's drunk. And said, get him sobered up because he's got surgery scheduled in the morning. And he's the only doctor on staff that can do this particular surgery at the present time. Dr. Bob was a proctologist. Now, I'm not sure where my procto is, but I'm glad he wasn't working on it the next morning. They went over and they got him and they brought him home, Bill and Ann did. And they walked him and they coffeed him and they sobered him up to the best of their ability. Next morning, Bill takes him to the hospital. Parking lot of the hospital, Dr. Bob said, Bill, I can't do this surgery. I'm sick and I'm shaking and I'm trembling and I'm going to hurt somebody. And Bill reached in the back seat of the car and got out a bottle of beer, popped the top on it and said, drink this and you'll be okay. Dr. Bob drank the beer, went upstairs, did the surgery, and sure enough, it came out just fine. The only problem is Bill's waiting on him down in the parking lot. Dr. Bob disappears. Bill waits for 2 or 3 hours. And he assumes that the beer's triggered the allergy and Bob has sneaked off and he's running again. Goes back to Dr. Bob's house. And Bill and Ann wait all afternoon. Late evening, Dr. Bob shows up at home. And he's sober. And Bill said, where in the hell have you been? He said, I've been going up and down both sides of the street, making amends to those I've harmed in the past. He never would do that before. That's why he never could apply their program to the depth necessary to recover. He was afraid to make amends. He was afraid people would find out he's alcoholic, and he would lose what little profession he had left. He didn't know that everybody already knew it anyhow. The day he made his amends was the last drink he ever took, that bottle of beer, June the 10th, 1935. Now, if it's good enough for Bob, it's probably good enough for me too. Let's look at steps 8 and 9 now for just a little bit, Joe.
Generally, when you go to a step study meeting, when we're talking about step 8, somehow or other the conversation bleeds over to doing step 9. Well, step 8 is a definite step that needs to be done. We make the list and become willing to the list. Now, I don't know about you, but steps 8 and 9 were two of the best steps that I've ever done. I don't know about you, but I have been very physically ill from drinking. I mean, extremely ill from drinking. And I've had lots and lots of hard hangovers. You see, suffered a lot. But those weren't the things that caused me to want to quit drinking. Now, they were contributing factors. But what really caused me to want to quit drinking was the guilt, shame, and remorse that I had as a result harms I've done to other people. I just could not stand it when I was sober. I just couldn't do it. So making amends is also a way to make amends to yourself. We make the amends to others, we feel better and we feel free from those things. So let's look at it in that light. And we need our sponsors more in the area of step 9 than we've ever needed our sponsor. We'll talk about that more later. Now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and then later 9. We have a list of all the persons we've harmed. We take all those people off of column 1 that we've harmed and put them on one long list, and to whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. So we've already got the list. It's already there. Just take all those people off the column 1, put them on a long list. We subjected ourselves to drastic self-appraisal. We did that through those other columns in step 5. Now we're about to go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. More prayer, step 8. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed in the beginning that we'd go to any length for victory over alcohol. And step 8, again, is a very simple little step. You make the list, becoming willing to the list, and if we're not willing, we simply ask God to help us to become willing, to make amends to them all.
Every action step recognizes self cannot overcome self. We got to have God's help in all these situations. And if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. And again, I went to see my sponsor. And I said, I don't believe I'm going to be able to do steps 8 and 9. He said, why? I said, because some of those people that I've harmed, they harmed me just as bad as I ever harmed them. And I'll be damned if I'm going to make any amends to them. He said, well, as usual, you're getting the cart before the horse. He said, step 8 doesn't talk about making amends. That's in step 9. He said, in step 8, you just have to make the list, which you've already done, and become willing to the list. And I said, well, that's the problem. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'm not willing to make amends to them all. Therefore, I can't do 8, and if I can't do 8, I can't do 9. He said, let me help you. I believe I can help you. He said, let's look at your list. And I'd already shown it to him once before. He said, now some of these people on this list, you love them, and they love you. And you really would like to make amends to them. He said, there's your daughter and your son, and your mother and your father. And he said, I'm not sure about Barbara either, but we'll talk about that later on. He said, you'd like to make amends to them right now, wouldn't you? And I said, yeah, sure I would. He said, take their name off of that list, put them on another list, and call it right now. Can you do that? And I said, yeah. He said, we'll do it and come back. And I did. And he said, now then, there's some of these people on this list that you know you're going to make amends to them. Not too keen about it, but sooner or later you're going to do it. And I said, sure. He said, take their name off of this list and put them on a list called later. Can you do that? I said, I think so. And he said, do it and come back. And I did. He said, now there's some on here you're really not sure about. You may or may not make amends to them. Is that right? And I said, sure. He said, take their name off and put it on a list and call it maybe. Can you do that? And I said, yeah. He said, do it and come back, and I did. And I came back and he said, now all these that's left here are the ones that you're not ever going to make amends to, right? And I said, you betcha. He said, take them off of that list and put them on another list and label it never. Can you do that? And I said, yeah. And he said, do it and come back, and I did. And he said, now then, I want you to start making amends to these on the right now list. He said, by the time you're through with the right now list, I think you'll be ready to start on those on the later list. And he said, by the time you do those on the later list, I think you'll be ready to do those on the maybe list. And he reached in his billfold and took out $10. And he said, I'm going to bet you $10. By the time you're through with that maybe list, you'll be ready to start on the nevers list. And you know the old fool was right. He didn't let me take just 3 or 4 or 5 names and block myself off from the whole process. He gave me a way to become willing to make amends to them all by separating it into 4 different lists. It really did work for me.
I wouldn't have thought of that, would you?
Now, step 8 then is quite simple. We make the list, which we've already done. We come willing to the list. And if we're not willing, to ask God to help us be willing until we become willing. And we're through with 8. Step 9 is a very definite, multiple part step. Step 9 tells us the kind of amends we need to make. Direct amends. It tells us when to make them, wherever possible. Now, a lot of times I hear people read how it works and they read whenever possible. No, it says wherever possible. You tell an alcoholic to do something whenever, just forget it. It's not going to get done. It said wherever possible. And then it tells us when not to make them, except when to do so would injure them or others. Now, Bill very carefully addresses all 3 of these issues in the following pages, paragraph by paragraph. The first thing is direct amends. And we think there's probably 2 kinds of direct amends. One of them is eyeball to eyeball, face to face, one-on-one. The purpose of me making my amends is not to get you to like me. Hopefully you will. But the purpose in making my amends is to get rid of my fear and my guilt associated with that thing, whatever it is. And if I go to you eyeball to eyeball, face to face, and make my amends to you to the best of my ability, I'll never have to worry about it again. You will have done all you're going to do to me right then. I will know I've done my utmost, and I can be free of that. He gives us an example of direct amends on page 77, in that paragraph there in the middle of the page, and it really starts with the 3rd sentence in that paragraph. I don't know why, but that's where he started it. The question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. Everybody see that? Mm-hmm. This is a direct amend, eyeball to eyeball.
He said the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. It may be he's done us more harm than we've done him. And though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we're still not too keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It's harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feelings and expressing our regret. Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Simply we tell him that we will never get over drinking until we've done our utmost to straighten out the past. We're there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never trying to tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. Now, if our manner is calm, frank, and open, we'll be gratified with the results. In 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes the man we're calling upon admits his own faults. So feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we're doing and wish us well. Occasionally they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We've made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam. And every time I read that, I think about my cousin Gary. Gary and I were raised up next door to each other. And it seemed to me like that all our life, all we did was fight each other, physically, verbally, every other way. We were just exactly alike, I guess. Never could run around together without fighting. So we kind of agreed not to run around together anymore. And I didn't see him, and he didn't see me. But one day when I got into this area of making amends, I was in this restaurant. And I've never been in that restaurant before or since. And I looked up, and Gary was at the front door, waiting to be sit down. And I motioned him over. And he came over very reluctantly. He wasn't quite sure what I might do. And I asked him to sit down, and he did. I said, Gary, I've joined Alcoholics Anonymous and quit drinking, and I'm trying to get my life straightened out. And I'd like to ask you to forgive me for all the harm that I've caused you. He kind of relaxed, and he said, Joe, won't you forgive me for the harm I've done you? The whole thing went away just like that. Now, the best part about this whole story is that from time to time, Gary comes to Alcoholics Anonymous. And when he does come, sometimes he comes to our group. It's been a long time since he's been there. But he's making progress. He used to be a daily drinker, now he's a periodic. See? So he's doing pretty good. And that would have never happened had we not had that encounter a long time ago. See, God makes the wherever possible. Or is that odd, or is that God? You see? God makes the wherever possible in a lot of cases.
Now, if that kind of a man would work on somebody you hate, then surely it would work on those that you just kind of dislike. Probably work on those you're not too crazy about. I'll bet you it'd work on somebody you love, too. Eyeball to eyeball, face to face, one-on-one. Another kind of direct demand is in equal proportion. Now, some of we alcoholics tended to write hot checks we never did pick up, run up bills we never did pay, tear up automobiles we never did fix. We've hurt many people in the area of economics. Now, how do we go about making that kind of restitution? Bill handles that in the next paragraph. Most alcoholics owe money. I think that's the understatement of the year, isn't it? We do not dodge our creditors, tell them what we're trying to do. We make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. Nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory it may cause financial harm. Approaching this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we are sorry. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors, no matter how far we have to go, for we're liable to drink if we're afraid to face them. I think what he's saying to me is this, that if I owe you money, I need to go see you and say, now you and I both know that I owe you $1,200. And I'd love to pay you today, but I can't do it. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to start paying you $10 a week. And you'd rather have $10 a week than nothing. And I start paying you $10 a week. And some morning I wake up and I say, by golly, that sucker is all paid off. I don't owe him anymore, and I go to the next one. Now, you and I both know I owe you $1,400, $1,500. Can't pay you today, God, I'd love to, but I can't. But I'd like to start paying you about $20 a week. By this time, I'm probably making a little more money. And I start paying you $20 a week. Next thing you know, I'll wake up and, by golly, that one's paid off too. Now go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And some morning I'll wake up, and by golly, they're all paid off. And the fear and the guilt and the remorse associated with those things are all gone. I've lived long enough to know and fully understand that time is going to pass. You can't stop it. I wish we could, but you can't. As it passes, I can use it for a worthwhile purpose and come out on the other end of it in good shape. Or I can let it slide and let it slide and let it slide, and 5 or 10 years from now be in the same kind of shape and maybe drunk over it in the meantime. You know, Joe and I had an old friend that used to live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and his name was Dan, and Dan finally moved out to California. Dan would have been sober
52 years this coming January.
52 years this January if he was still alive. He's dead now. Dan was 29 years sober. And he said to me one day, Charlie, I paid the last one of them last week. Took him 29 years to pay them. When Dan was in the drinking, he was down in Texas in the oil business. And he hooked them, and he hooked them big too. Took him 29 years to pay them all back. I said, Dan, how do you feel? He said, man, I feel about 8 foot tall. You know, Dan's a little bitty fella, about 5'1". He said, this is the first time in my life that I can ever remember that I don't owe somebody something for what I've stolen from them in the past. Tell you how good a con artist he was. His wife, Sarah, who turned out to be a beautiful, beautiful Al-Anon. Down in Texas, when Dan was drinking, one day she took him to the State Insane Asylum in Big Springs, Texas, to have him admitted for alcoholic insanity. And the head psychiatrist interviewed Sarah, and then he interviewed Dan. And after a while, Dan left, and Sarah was locked up. She stayed there for a year. They taught her how to live better electrically with all that kind of crap they do in there. Like to kill that woman.
She said she forgave him for everything else, but she couldn't hardly forgive him for that one. That was the worst.
So if old Dan could do it, I probably could too, you know. And I hear some of you saying, and again, I hear awful good, I hear some of you saying, Charlie, that's probably true for $1,000 or $1,400 or $1,500. What if it's $50,000? What if it's $150,000? What if it's $500,000? Could we pay that back? Well, I don't know why we can't. If we're smart enough to steal it, we're probably smart enough to pay it back. You know, I think we forget from step 3 on, God's going to be with us. And if we are to do these things, God's going to make it possible, providing we are willing to do so. Dan was just one example. I don't know how much money was involved, but it was a hell of a lot of money. I know that much. And old Dan finally paid them all back. This thing really does work.
I spent a lot of time in Dan's house, and Sarah sitting across the table from him. Phyllis and I, they spoon feeding us AA. Fixing dinner for us, playing bridge, supposed to be playing bridge, but we were talking about AA, Al-Anon things. He always had a nice car. Wasn't brand new, but a nice car. Lived in a nice home. Had nice furniture. Went places all the AA conference we ever wanted to go to. Went on a cruise or two with him. So he had enough money in addition to pay back that money that he owed, you see. So he found a way to do it.
Bottom of page 78, we're not going to go through all these examples. It just takes too long. But the bottom of page 78, it talks about criminal offenses. In the middle of page 79, it talks about where other people are involved. We need to consider others. You know, if it's going to hurt them or somebody else, we have to be very, very careful in this kind of situation. Over on page 80, it talks about him going to some other people and getting their permission before he made the amends, because there's a possibility they would be hurt by it. At the bottom of page 80, it talks about domestic problems. Page 81, it talks about sex outside of marriage. What are we going to do about those kind of things? You know, Joe and I both agree that I've never really had anybody come to me with questions about making amends that we can't find the answer for here in the book somewhere. You know, it's pretty complete on all these different kind of situations. Our main suggestion is before you start making amends, get you a good sponsor. And then talk to that sponsor about these amends. Because I'm not sure that we're capable of honestly seeing it good enough to see whether we should make it or whether we shouldn't make it, whether it will hurt somebody or whether it won't. And I know that's what I had to do finally. And some of those that I really wanted to make, and I would talk to him about them, and he said, no, you can't do that. If you do it, you're going to hurt them or somebody else just as bad. You're just going to have to wait. And over a period of years, finally, that wherever possible became possible for them too. And I really got to make my last one here just a few years ago. And it was dealing with family issues. And I simply could not do that without hurting somebody else. And due to a death in the family, finally I was released and free to be able to go ahead and do that. And I just had to hold on to it in that time. Some of them, I said to him, I believe if I make this amend, I'm going to hurt them. And he'd look at it and he'd say, no, not this time. He said, you just go ahead and make this one. It'll be okay. I don't really think we're capable of determining by ourselves whether we should or shouldn't. That's where a good sponsor comes in. Let's go to page 83, third paragraph. There may be some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them. We can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some of these people are already dead and buried. Some of them, to make amends, would hurt them or others. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. There may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. We should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble, without being servile or scraping. As God's people, we stand on our feet. We don't crawl before anyone. And one mistake we see people making is they'll go to somebody to make their amends and they won't accept it. And we're just crushed by that. And we tend to want to go back and go back and go back and literally beg those people to forgive us. No, the book says we don't need to do that. Make our amends to the best of our ability. If they don't accept it, there's nothing we can do about that. About all we can do is hold ourselves in readiness, and if the opportunity comes to do it again at a later date, maybe so then. But we don't have to beg anybody. As God's people, we stand on our own feet. We don't have to crawl. Joe?
Always reminds me of a situation with a little daughter, Gail. I got divorced from the other lady, and now I start thinking real good. And I'm sitting at the bar thinking, and this time I'm going to find me a woman that drinks. I'm thinking good now. These women that don't drink are mean and ugly. And one night I looked up and Phyllis came in the door. And I'm sitting out the end of the bar like this. And the bartender said, Phyllis, what would you like to drink? She said, give me some of what he's drinking. And pretty soon we were introduced. Phyllis said, Joe, you look like my third husband. And I said, my God, how many have you had? She said, 2. I kind of like that. And I said, did it hurt? She said, what? Did what hurt? I said, when you fell out of heaven. Isn't that something? I've been watching Phyllis. She'd been drinking and staying up late like I did. And Phyllis was the queen bee of the Zebra Lounge. You guys know her. She's the one who took up the collection to pay the jukebox. That's her. And we started drinking and running around together. And 6 or 8 months later, we got married. And she had a little daughter by a previous marriage who was living with her dad at that time. And I liked her very much. And she came over to live with us. And Phyllis said, we're drinking an awful lot. Let's not drink so much in front of Gail. I said, that's a good idea. And I was wanting to do that, but not knowing that I couldn't quit, see. And after 30 days, I couldn't stand it anymore and got drunk again. Well, Phyllis and I were drinking together, and we couldn't go to the bar together without fighting. Because you see, I came out of this marriage with a list of things that were about this long that this one's not going to do that other one did. Phyllis had a list of things about that long that this one's not going to do that other one did. And now we're enforcing our list on each other. And God, did it get awful then. I'm telling you, whew, that's a whole new story. We got so that we couldn't even drink together. So we made a deal. 41st Street in Tulsa is kind of the halfway between north and south. And Phyllis could have the south half of 41st Street, 41st and south, and I get 41st and north. And we would meet at home from time to time and visit. And do our drinking. She does hers there, and I do mine over here. Got a good deal. And that went on for a long time, and I had a little mobile home up on a lake west of our city, and one night Gail and Phyllis showed up there at 3 o'clock in the morning and embarrassed me in front of my girlfriend and stuff. And that was another situation. Just kill me. Just kill me to have that situation. How are you going to make amends to a little old girl for that? What are you going to say? A remorseful mumbling that I'm sorry, is that going to do it? No. She'd heard that from us before. But she got married when she's about 17 years old and began to have her children. And Phyllis and I are getting sober now and early in our sobriety. And what we did was that we were there every time she had a child. We were at the hospital. We lived sober and did the right thing. See, I wasn't a very good father, but I'm a damn good grandfather, I can tell you that. And I'm that, and Phyllis is a great grandmother. And after 2 or 3 years of this, they move off to Ohio. Phyllis and I talked it over, and we didn't mind Gail and Jim moving, but they took our grandkids with them. And up there, after a year or two up there, something happened to her sister-in-law, who was young, 32 years old, and died and left 3 kids to her husband. And Gail called us one night, and she said, "Papa?" I said, "Yeah." She told me this story. She said, "But something was to happen to Jim and I. Would you and Mom take the kids?" That's when I knew it was okay with us. A remorseful mumbling that I'm sorry won't cut it. But living sober, doing the right thing, being there, that will do it. The action is a whole lot more better than words. And that happened with us. And today we have a good relationship together. They're back in Tulsa now. But after you've done all you can do to make amends, there comes a day when you say, "I'm not making any more amends." So you see, we'll make each other pay forever if we'll pay. Someday, you quit making amends. You quit feeling that guilt, shame, remorse, because we'll put it on each other and make each other feel bad forever. Someday you say, "Hey, I'm not paying no more." That's it.
Yeah, I love that. Gets a little bit cringy there at the end with some of the pickup lines, but anyway, the overall concept of how to do steps 8 and 9 is just wonderful. Eventually, we'll be coming back to steps 10 and 11 and finishing out their series. I had mentioned before that step 12 is in the next chapter, working with others, and they don't really get into that on this recording. Like I had mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I'm busy working on the Bay Area Retreat Committee, and this is an event that we do every March. And this year will be March 14th through 16th in Marin County. For anyone here in the Bay Area or in Northern California that is interested, I will be providing links to the BayAreaSAA.org website that has all of the pertinent information for that. But just as a little teaser, the Bay Area Retreat Committee is excited to invite you to our annual Out of the Fog retreat at Walker Creek Ranch in Marin County on the weekend of March 14th through 16th, 2025. Enrich your recovery with meetings, workshops, meditation, and fellowship. We'll also enjoy a manner of outer circle activities, including drum circles, campfires, game night, talent no talent show, and hiking among the rolling hills of West Marin. This is kind of our standard blurb, and I am going to be submitting a workshop proposal on music and recovery, and this one more focused on the healing power of sound rather than the lyrics as the focus. So hopefully we will be able to do something like that. One of the things that happened or didn't happen at last year's retreat, usually after our Talent No Talent show, a bunch of us get together and play music for another hour. And because we ran super late on the talent show, we didn't get to do that. So that was the impetus for me doing another music and recovery workshop where we will be able to get up and play some music together during the workshop and a little bit afterwards. And again, that's if the workshop gets approved. So anyway, I am so looking forward to this year's retreat. So with that, I'm going to move on to email. And again, I am still far behind on answering all of the emails, so I'm slowly catching up with that, but please bear with me for those of you looking for a written response. This one just came in this past week and from someone in the Noon groups. And it says, "Hi, Jason. I'm so grateful for this podcast, and it's really helped me understand many different concepts. I just wanted to add that one of my new favorite songs that really nails the third step on its head is Control by the band For King and Country. It's really beautiful and so impactful. This band has a lot of spiritual and faith-based songs that are very good and uplifting to listen to. Also, I really wanted to thank you for the podcast, and if you ever get a chance, maybe you can do an episode on sex addiction and kink. That would be quite awesome to see these topics intertwined. Kind regards, Mass from Denmark." And Mass gave me permission to use his name with this email. And yes, I've played For King and Country on the podcast before. One of our previous guests had sent me his recovery playlist that had probably about 10 songs by the band, and Control was one of them. And I have yet to play that on the podcast, so I will be doing that shortly. When it comes to the topic that you suggested, another former guest of the podcast years ago did a workshop at our retreat talking about kink and how it relates to healthy outer circle sexual activity. And so that's a subject that I've been wanting to talk about. I incorporate BDSM into a healthy outer circle and would very much like to talk about this topic. So look for that in the future. Again, I'm going to need a lot of scheduling heads up to see when we can do that. But yes, I would love to cover this topic. Last year at our retreat, I had a great conversation around this topic and looking to explore it further. So looking forward to that suggestion. So on to the song Control by For King and Country. Yeah, I really love the lyrics for this, and it does seem to be very much aligned with the topic of surrender, letting go, and having a higher power take over, right in line with the third step. So here is the first verse and chorus from Control by For King and Country.
You asked me to let go, but I thought I knew better. Afraid of surrender and what I don't know. I've always had a plan, but now I'm so weary, and I can't see clearly, forgot who I am. So won't you make my eyes, my ears, your ears, my tears, your tears. And won't you make my hands, your hands, my feet, your feet, my dreams, your dreams. I give up control. Control. Can I speak honestly? I've still got some questions, still fighting the tension. I need some relief.
Great suggestion, and I'm really grateful that I was able to play that here on the podcast. There are a lot of songs that were in my former guests' spiritual playlist that I have yet to come back around full circle and share those here on the podcast. But that is a great reminder. And yeah, for anyone else out there that wants to email and make suggestions on songs that are particularly important in their recovery and would like to share that with the podcast community, you can always reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, and for any other feedback on other episodes as well. If you wanted to get a hold of me personally, schedule yourself as a guest. If you have any other questions about the podcast or the program of SAA, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. I do have a couple of new episodes that I am still in the process of scheduling, and our February SAA and COSA speaker meeting is coming up very soon. Even though it's the beginning of February, I probably won't get the links for those until late February. So look for those episodes coming out in the future. But with that, I am going to wrap up this episode. I thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.